Hello everyone, my name is LanceBeryl, and today I'm doing a sort of follow-up video to my previous tutorial on Ghibli Stylized grass. I know that video only recently came out, but since then there's been a lot of development in regards to achieving stylized grass, to the point that I consider my previous tutorial to be basically rendered obsolete, as new methods have refined the process to the point that it's infinitely easier to achieve the desired results. Literally a day after I published my tutorial, artist and Twitter user Kidane or Puffertron saw my video, and using the same principle of grabbing an object's normal and applying it to the grass particles, he was able to achieve stylized shadows using only materials without any of the convoluted workarounds that were necessary to achieve the effect in my first tutorial. I was originally going to do just a tutorial showcasing Kidane's method, but after some experimentation, I found that I could refine it even further to produce even better results, making it even simpler and giving the user more control over the shadows and the various properties of the material. Now, I won't be going over everything that I went through in my previous tutorial, as the majority of that tutorial was dedicated to trying to explain how to achieve stylized shadows on grass using my original method, which, as I said, is now pretty much obsolete. However, to give a quick recap of what it is we're actually trying to achieve, we're trying to achieve this stylized grass aesthetic. In the past, if you wanted to get grass to look stylized, you would have to use, a grass texture plugged into an emission shader. However, this brings up a problem as while the grass itself is stylized, it doesn't cast any shadows onto itself. There is, however, such a thing as a simple toon shader, as seen here. Let me just give you a better look. Pretty standard toon shader will work for most objects, but if you try doing this with grass, if you plug it in, you can see the shadows don't really look as desired, as you can see right here. And this is because the grass particles are not only receiving shadows from the cube, but they're also receiving shadows from themselves, and this is not what we want. And achieving this effect was proving very difficult. I spent a lot of time researching this method, trying to figure it out, and as you can see, I did get it to work. However, it came with quite a few caveats. Now, I won't go too deeply into how I achieved this effect, because there's the whole previous tutorial if you want to watch that. It's took over about 30 minutes getting this to work. A lot of that was just me explaining what the problem was and how to solve it instead of actually doing it. But to summarize, in order to prevent the grass particles from casting shadows on themselves, the only method I was able to come to at the time using the available information was grabbing the normal data of the plane and applying it to the particles. The problem is, I couldn't find a way to do this within the materials or the particle settings. So what I had to do was use a particle object, that being this low poly blade of grass, and using that and a data transfer modifier, which, as explained in the last video, was a trick I learned from Lightning Boy Studios' video on stylized trees. And effectively, yeah, what we're doing is we're using this grass blade object, and we're grabbing the normal data from the ground, applying it to the grass blade object. There's a lot of steps involved, but I think one of the only other notable things you would have to do, besides all the junk you have to do in the nodes and stuff and particle settings, is to set the shadow mode to none. Because if you set it to opaque, the grass still casts a shadow on itself. However, it still looks better this way, I would say. But yeah, you want to turn that off. And yeah, it achieved the desired result. However, it came with a few caveats. Again, this was still the first time this effect was achievable in Blender Eevee that I'm aware of. But yeah, it came with a few caveats. One of them being you had to use object as your texture coordinate. You had to select the ground object in this little dropper thing here, and then check from instancer. And that kind of limits how free or creative you can be, not being able to use UV or generated. As you can see, if I plug this in, kind of messes it up. And this method, because it is using actual in-world objects and it's not using paths, right? Because it's not using paths, it's using objects, that will inevitably, from my experience, have an impact on performance. That's why this object has to be so low poly. I realized I could even decrease it further by just making it like a literal sort of a pyramid without a bottom. But yeah, that is how I was able to achieve this result. And it even works on objects like hills. However, while experimenting with Kidane's method, I found another issue arise from my previous method, and that was because it's rendering objects instead of path particles. The particles weren't following the directional normals of the objects. And this is something I'm still not sure how to fix. I'm confident that there is a solution. However, as I said, these other methods over here have proven way easier, way less resource or time intensive. So I probably won't look into a solution for this. I could see situations where you would want to use objects instead of standard particles. So let me know in the comments if any of you know how to kind of solve this issue when it comes to getting particle objects to face the right way according to the emitter object's normals. As you can see with here, they render fine as paths, but not as objects. So yeah, about a day after I uploaded my first tutorial, artist and Twitter user Kidane, or Puffertron, watched my video and was able to greatly simplify this method, confining all of the work to only 2 materials, without, like I said, all of the aforementioned caveats that came with my original method. As you can see, it completely interacts with the light, about the same. However, the actual effect is way easier to achieve. But as you can see, when it comes to the corners of objects and stuff and the shadows, they kind of have these weird artifacts, and the material itself lacks a bit of creative control when it comes to the shadows. And as I'll show you, there were a lot of nodes that just, as far as I could tell, didn't really need to be there to achieve the effect. And it got to the point that I thought these were different enough that I would pitch this as my sort of revised method, sort of a combination of my original method and Kidane's revision. Again, big thanks to him. I actually got this effect working quite a few days ago, and I would have recorded this video sooner. Unfortunately, there was a lot going on. I had family staying over due to the Oregon fires, and I also went temporarily deaf, practically, for the past like 4 days. My hearing is mostly returned, still having trouble hearing out of one ear, but I wanted to get this video out to you guys as soon as possible, so I'd like to apologize if there's any audio problems that I somehow overlooked. I think the best place to start is really to just start breaking down why certain methods work and don't work in specific circumstances. First, let's start off with the standard toon shader. I said in the last video I was going to make this project, or rather the previous project, like a blend file available for download in the description. Since then, a better method was found literally the very next day, and then I was able to even revise that method further. I won't be uploading those blend files into the description of that video. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to link this video in that video's description, and then this video's description, I will try and get this blend file compiled and uploaded for you guys to use. I went through a lot of work trying to visually explain how all of this works and why certain aspects of each method work, don't work. As you can see with this method, there's quite a lot of notes, as this method required a lot of workarounds in order to get it to work. So I likely won't be going over each and every little detail. I'll leave that up for you guys to read through the blend file yourselves. But for those of you who don't want to really download this and would rather me just show you what to do in this video and why certain methods work and don't work, I'll be sort of showcasing each method and explaining how it was better refined over time. So starting with the first, this isn't even really a method because it doesn't even achieve the results we want. This is just an example of trying to get toon shaders to work. This is how most people would achieve a sort of stylized grass effect in the past. As I said in my last video, I was able to achieve this sort of effect using Christoph's method on making a stylized Ghibli grass. It's just he straight up used an image texture. However, I didn't want to have to draw one from scratch, and so all I did was I just took a Musgrave texture, make sure it had, texture coordinate mapping. You can increase and decrease the scale of the texture with this, or of course, this if you want. I plugged it into a bright contrast node to kind of give the patches the right sort of colors. Plug that into a color ramp for some extra control. It also kind of caps the effect of the bright contrast node, keeping it from getting a bit too crazy. Plugging that into a mix shader. So basically what this does is it takes the black and white data and uses that to determine what is this lighter shade of green and what is this darker shade of green. And basically all you do is just plug that into an emission shader and it gives you pretty good looking stylized grass. This is all in Eevee, by the way. I don't know if I specified that, but this is all in Eevee. However, the problem with this method is you don't get any shadows. So what I and other people would try to do is just plug in a toon shader, see what would happen, and this, of course, brings us to our conundrum, which is that it only really looks good from this angle, the angle facing the light. But if you go to an angle facing side on or behind the light, you can see the grass particles are casting shadows on themselves, and we don't want that. And solving that was the conundrum, trying to figure that out. And through a lot of research and experimentation, and huge thanks again to Lightning Boy's video on Ghibli Stylized trees, I was able to figure it out. As you can see, it completely interacts with the light, as you would expect from stylized grass. However, as I said before, it came with a few caveats. So I explained the basics already of how it works using the object and data transfer modifier and all that complicated stuff. Again, you can read all of this if you want. It's a lot to go through. Basically, it's the same shader as the previous one. Basically the same shader. The only difference is texture coordinate has to be set to object. All these got to be, to the same settings as I said before. And the material itself, the shadow mode, has to be set to none. But yeah, as you can see, it achieves the effect pretty well. But there are, like I said, some caveats. Still don't know how to solve this problem. I'm sure there is a solution. I tried messing with this rotation, the rotation settings and the particle settings. That did nothing. It might be a fault on Blender's end. Like, I've heard that the particle settings are just kind of a bit broken in 2.8. I believe I'm using 2.83. I'm not sure which version I'm using. And yeah, this has a slight impact on performance. But this was obviously like a huge step up over this. Like just getting it to even look close to what we want was I was pretty proud of that. Then literally the next day, I still can't believe how quickly he solved this. But Kidene saw my video, and he was able to replicate the effect really closely using only nodes. Only two materials, one for the grass and one for the ground. I'll explain why you need the two materials a bit later. As you can see, unlike my previous method, his is not restricted to what type of texture coordinate you can use. You can use generated, you can use UV. You can change whether the mapping node type be point, texture, factor. As far as I can tell, there is no difference. Actually, wait, he doesn't actually show what his grass texture looks like. He's got it kind of compressed. I forget how to do that. Again, we don't really see how he made his texture, but this is just probably the easiest way to achieve sort of like patchy grass texture, you know. Yeah, the real difference comes down here how he grabs the normal data. Because compared to how I was doing this before, I was using a grass blight object and using this data transfer modifier. Now I assumed there was a way to do this with materials, it's just I wasn't smart enough to figure it out. But as you can see, he's got quite a lot going on, plugging in geometry normal into like a normal node, then that to the normal diffuse node. He's using a mix shader, using hair info and all this stuff, and then finally all of that comes and plugs into what is effectively a standard toon shader node. If you go back, you can see this is basically how you make a simple toon shader. I probably should have clarified this, but basically how this works is it's grabbing the normal data from a diffuse shader. So like the incoming light data, it's using the diffuse shader to sort of grab or determine what all that light info is, and then you're taking that and you're converting it into color. And then you plug that into color ramp to kind of tweak it how you want. I think it's easier to visualize this if I just duplicate this and plug the color ramp into the thic right here, and then just straight up plug that into emission, and you will be able to more easily see what this is doing. If I were to make a sphere, gave it the same shader, you can see it's got this toon shaded effect that will always follow the light. How sharp this effect is determined by the color ramp. And then plug that into a mix. Basically what this does is it decides what is and isn't shadow. And how I determine what shadow is I take the base color of the grass and I plugged it into a hue saturation node, and as you can see, if I change the hue, it changes the shadow's color. And so you can play around with this and make the shadow any color you want. It's basically how my effect works. However, if you look at Kidene's method, he's doing things a bit differently. He's still having something grab the normal data, in this case a normal node specifically, and converting that information into color. But instead of using a mix node, he's actually using a multiply node. So basically what that does is it takes the base color and he multiplies the brightness of it. And I think it produces a pretty good effect, but again, I don't think it offers as much control as my original method with the mix node and the hue saturation. I think that this offers much more control. But yeah, I actually was recording a tutorial where I was just gonna say, everyone use this method. It's infinitely better than my previous method. It improves and simplifies it in almost every single way. Big thanks to Kidene and all that. And yeah, I still want to clarify that what Kidene did really broke ground, showing that this effect is in fact achievable using only materials without all the complex modifiers and all that stuff. However, as I started to really understand how his effect worked and I sort of picked it apart, I realized that there's actually a lot of unnecessary nodes in here. And like I said, I don't believe it gives you quite as much control. That's it. I'm not trying to bash this at all because it is a huge step up over my previous version. It pretty much rendered my previous method utter garbage. I don't in any way hold any negative feelings towards him for that, because honestly, this is what I wanted. I wanted us as a community to refine this concept even further, and that's what Kidane did. Oh, I should also point out, this is something that Kidane didn't even mention in his own tweet, but in order to achieve this effect, you have to make sure that the grass shader, by the way, this uses two shaders. I probably should talk about the ground shader in a bit, but the grass shader, the shadow mode has to be set to none. This is really important when it comes to achieving the effect. If you set it to opaque, yeah, you can kind of see. It still looks good. I could see a circumstance where you would want this sort of effect, honestly. But yeah, like this is the desired look that we want. Okay, switching over to ground shader for a second. So basically how this material differs from the previous one is, as you can see down here, instead it just uses a simple toon shader. This was another sort of thing I noticed while breaking down his method. As you can see, bringing his tweet back up, he has this complex thing going on in order to grab the normal data and convert it into color. However, for the ground, he just uses basically a simple toon shader. He doesn't use the color ramp. That's just kind of something I do to better like refine the look. Actually, yeah, if you go like to his original tweet, you can see that the shadows are really soft, and that's because he wasn't using a color ramp. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just can be like a preference thing. But yeah, I think having a color ramp really gives you some extra control. So yeah, as I was saying, he uses this more complex setup to grab the normal data and convert it to color. But then for the ground, he just uses a standard toon shader, and it's using this simple toon shader that kind of leads to, like, you can see it better from a distance. But there's kind of these artifacts from the geometry that kind of peek through, because basically what's going on is the grass particles, obviously, I don't know if this was something I really needed to explain, but the grass material is applied to the grass particles, you know, down here. I feel like that should be pretty self-explanatory if you've used particle system before. But then this is applied to the actual mesh, and that sort of achieves the right effect. And the reason you need to, the grass, needs to have its shadow mode set to none. But then the ground needs to have its shadow mode set to opaque. And the reason for this, if I were to set it to none, now the emitter or ground object is not casting a shadow onto the grass despite it facing away from the sun. And that just looks weird. But yeah, if you got rid of this, I could see some circumstances where you would be okay with this. Like maybe with in some styles you might want that effect, but to achieve a really authentic look, you want to have a separate material applied to the ground and then have its shadow mode set to opaque. But yes, like I was saying, there's some artifacts that can be seen on the edges of the mesh, and this is something you can also see with the monkey head. They're a lot sharper, and it looks compared to this, it just looks a little weird. And again, looking at this, you can kind of see by comparison, like again, I'm not saying like my method over here is like the most perfect it could ever be. I'm expecting that at some point someone will come out with perhaps even an even better method. I'm just saying, while experimenting with Kidane's method, I noticed all these little ways it could be improved upon even further. And again, if you want to read through all of this, you totally can. You can download the blend file. But yeah, still, compared to what it was like before, this is like really clean. and didn't come with all of the caveats that my previous version did. Okay, and with that, I think it's time we finally move on to my revised method. Basically what this is, it's sort of a combination of Kidane's method and my original materials, is trying to kind of get the best of both worlds. So if we peer in here and have a look first, so there's a lot of notes here. Now it was when I was experimenting with Kidane's method that I discovered something mind-blowing. Okay, as you can see, this isn't too far off from the base toon shader. It's not that far off at all. In fact, you look, it's aside from all the the text, it's basically the same, except for one thing. This is literally all that is required to achieve the effect. If you don't believe me, look at this. Hold on, let me just turn this off. Look at that. Did you see what just happened? Let me do it back. Let me just play it back for you. This is all that you need to achieve the stylized grass effect. Literally just one node plugged into the normal socket of a diffuse and a standard toon shader. It's not all that advanced. Plug that into a thic, and then just the hue and the value of your base texture. That's it. That's it. This is the entire thing. I guess, yeah, there is the the ground shader, obviously, which is basically the same. We'll get into how that's different. It's not all that different, but it's just wow. Like, look, there's no weird modifiers on this thing. It's just, this is it. This is like the only thing. This is the thing we were missing all this time. We were trying to figure out why we couldn't get shadows to work. Just this one node. Nothing needs to be plugged into here. So Kidane's method, he's got all this going on. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why any of this is necessary. Like, I tried, I really messed around and played with it, and as far as I could tell, you don't need any of that. You can just use just the normal node. And I feel so stupid. I knew this thing existed, but it never occurred to me to try and use it to grab the normal data. It never occurred to me. But again, I wouldn't have figured this out if it wasn't for Kidane in his revision that he posted to Twitter. But yeah, just he has it plugged into the diffuse, and then has that plugged into a shader node, and that plugged into his multiply node. And I thought to myself, why can't I just plug that into a diffuse without any of this mess, and then plug that to a shader RGB and then color amp, and like, why can't I just do that? And yeah, you totally can. And it's just crazy how complicated we've been making this seem, and in reality, it's that easy. You just plug it into simple toon shader, plug that into a mix node, then you can take your base texture, whatever it is, split it in half, have base texture going here, then have like a hue saturation to determine how that base texture color is different as a shadow, and then just plug that into an emission, and that is it. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, how does this even work? Why is it that this one node makes all of this work? And I myself do not fully understand. As I writ it all down right here. I do not fully understand how this works. However, based off of my observations, based off all of the research I've done and experimentation, basically the conclusion I came to is that with the shadow mode set to none, because if you turn it to opaque, it's like same problem as before. When you set it to none and you plug in this normal node, it either grabs the data from the object disregarding the particles, or it flat out assigns the particles a uniform normal value. Again, I would like someone to really explain how this works, but those are my two theories. I honestly have no idea why this works, just that it works. Either it's taking data from the plane because the object has the material in the material library, and it might just be applying that normal to particles as it doesn't account for them as we can see was the case with the data transfer modifier. It appeared to just didn't seem to account for the particles, which is how we were able to achieve the effect. Or it's completely possible, like I was saying, that it just applies a uniform normal value across all of them. How that works, I have no idea. It just works. Like that's all I could say. Yeah, so just like Hidene's method, you're not constrained to using only one type of texture coordinate. You can use generated normal object. You can use whatever you want. Something important I should say, because these two methods use two materials, you want to make sure that the scale of your texture, either through the mapping node or for the Musgrave node, you want to make sure that either way they're both the same scale. Otherwise, it will start to look weird. If I were to mess with the scale here, you can see it's not really following. Like if I keep an eye like right there, it's not really, doesn't look right. So you want to make sure they're the same, so it kind of like blends into the ground. That achieves a really nice stylized sort of effect. As for this whole deal with the artifacts, you can see there's like some artifact thing going on right here. However, this is a lot smoother. And keep in mind, this is just a square. I didn't like subdivide this or anything. Yet the shadow, it just looks better, especially from a distance. You can see it's a lot softer. And the reason for that is, you go to the ground shader. So what Hidene did for his ground shader is he just used a simple toon shader, and it works pretty good. But it's still, like as I said, has those kind of artifacts going on. So what I did was I just plugged in another normal node in there, and it just smooths it out. You could play with the color ramp a bit if you wanted. Try and see what you can do with that. But from my experience, you just kind of want to leave it the same, and it gives you a really good result. However, like I said before, you must make sure that the ground material is set to opaque, because if you set it to none, the object won't cast shadow on itself. And again, there are instances where you might want that, but like say if you're like designing a cliff or something, or like have other objects like characters with fur, for example, and they're kind of one standing in front of the other, and there's a light source in front of that. You want them to cast shadows on the object behind them as well. Like if I were to duplicate this, you can see this casts a shadow on this object, but if I were to disable, it does not, and that just looks weird. So yeah, keep that set to opaque. And like I said, using this method with the mix and the hue saturation value, it gives you a lot more control. Whoops. Oh, that's something else you have to keep in mind. Okay, so when you're changing this, it's a different material. So in order to get these looking the same, you want to make sure that whatever you're doing here, you're also doing to the ground. Yeah, like I said, you can make this any color you want. If I make it brighter, can make it like a darker blue. Can make it like a red. However, it won't look right if the ground shader doesn't have its hue and saturation stuff set to the same settings. So what you want to do is I guess just like once you get this looking to how you want, I guess you would just copy paste it over. I don't know if there's a way to grab the information from a specific node from another material, or maybe have something else determine what these values are. If so, that would be really useful, seeing as how these are split up between two materials, but it's not that big of an issue. Especially compared to like all the work you had to go through before. This is like way better. So if I do this, yeah, now you can see now it looks really uniform, and it completely interacts with the light. Again, this is just crazy. Think about where we were only like a week ago. People didn't think this was possible, or at the very least, it was something they didn't know how to achieve. And suddenly, a week later, it's at the point where we refined this to such point. Look at this. Look at how easy this is. This is literally these two materials. It's all you need. That's crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if someone found a way to refine this even further, achieve even better results somehow, or even apply it to other aspects like other types of foliage or clouds or all kinds of things. So yeah, if you're wanting me to do a tutorial where I like create the ground plane and make a particle system from scratch, I just did a tutorial on it before, although being with the more complex method. Instead, I would recommend Christoph's tutorial on Ghibli Stylized grass. That was the tutorial that I watched, along with Lightning Boy's video on Ghibli Stylized trees. It was sort of a combination of those two videos that led me to originally figuring this dilemma out. But I think it's so cool seeing the sort of community progression, trying to figure out the Ghibli aesthetic. But yeah, I'll be sure to compile this and make it and link it in the description if any of you want to check it out and play with it. Like I said, I put a lot of work into explaining how and why these methods work or don't work in certain circumstances. Big thanks again to these guys who made the video possible. I'll be linking all of them down in the description below. If you're wanting to see more animations or Blender stuff from me, consider liking or subscribing. The main reason I endeavored to set out and try and solve this problem is because I myself am working on a video essay and I wanted to do some cool stylized animated segments for it, so be sure to stick around if you're interested. I apologize again if the audio sounds bad. Again, I currently have some hearing problems and I'm not all that comfortable with speaking in front of a microphone and all that stuff, so please be understanding, but I'd love to hear any feedback you guys have. And with that, I think that's everything so far. I don't know if I'll do a follow-up to this video if a better method comes about. I just felt like my original method was so outdated by this point, I had to do a sort of update video because I didn't want people go about doing it the super complicated way with all of its caveats if a simpler and more effective method existed. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to make more stuff with you guys in the future.